Thanks for listening to In the Game with Elliot. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on the latest episodes. Hey everyone, I'm Elliot Georgiadis, and welcome to episode 1 of In the Game with Elliot and our first guest, Theresa Mellas. Theresa is a physician's assistant who volunteered to work for 2 months in a COVID-19 ICU in New York City during the peak of the outbreak last spring. Afterwards, she set off on a solo bike trip across the country. Theresa, I am thrilled to introduce you as the first guest, not only because you are just like this incredible, wonderful adventure woman that has been all over the world and done all kinds of things, but last year, after working in the COVID ICU for 2 months, deciding to bike across the country, I just feel like there's so much of that story that needs to be told. And I'm so glad that we're going to get to talk about it and get to share it more, because I'm really, really excited for you to share your experience with people. Although I will say, I'm going to brag a little bit that yes, you and I are cousins. So I feel extra excited that you wanted to talk to me. I joke with people all the time that I'm really not quite sure how we're from the same gene pool, because you're like, I'm on a camel in the Sahara or climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And it's like, I can eat a whole pint of ice cream in one sitting.
I can do that too, though.
You probably have.
It's balance.
Well, you probably have a little bit of a better balance than I do, but that's okay. It's okay. I'll get to brag on you and all the cool things that you did. But that's the thing too. Like, before we even get into what you did last year, you, for the last 10 plus years, travel is a big part of what you do. Didn't you do all 7 continents before you hit 30? Wasn't that the goal for you and your sister?
Yeah, Rachel and I did. I know. It's nuts, really.
What was the last one you did?
Antarctica.
That's not far or anything. No. Or how long were you there?
2 weeks. The trip was 2 weeks, but it takes about 2.5 days to get to Antarctica and 2.5 days to come back. So you're probably on the continent for 8 days, weather dependent.
I feel like we could do like a whole Theresa Mellas mini series on the different adventures that you have had, like that one. There's a lot that we could talk about, but I really obviously want to talk about last year and what you decided to do. You are a physician's assistant. So last year, when the pandemic broke out, you were in Lockport, New York, right? You were at home base.
Actually, I was in Germany with Rachel.
Oh,
right when it hit. And then it was probably within 4 days of me actually getting back into the US, where they closed the borders. But yes, I was technically, when everything was shut down, I was in Lockport. Yeah.
Right. And you weren't planning on working because you had been traveling. You didn't have any assigned contracts yet, did you?
I had per diem shifts at home in Lockport that I was going to work. And in May, I had a pre-signed contract in New York City for just a couple months. It got changed because of COVID. They said they were putting my contract on hold because nobody really knew what was going on or how it was going to be impacted, this contract. And so I didn't have a job in Lockport. The opportunity arose for the ICU. The governor of New York said, we need help. And I got the phone call on Friday, 4 p.m. that said you had to be in New York City the next day in the morning. And you get 30 minutes to decide whether or not you're going. And I said, I guess I'm going to go. I guess I better go. I don't have a job.
You're saying things had changed because of COVID, but you didn't have a job. It's still a big decision. I think.
Yeah, it was, because I felt so comfortable at home. I had been home for a couple weeks, and we were all into our quarantine bubble. Everyone in the beginning was kind of like, quarantine's not so bad, right? We were like, it was nice to have your quality time. It was nice to kind of read books and like do things that you normally wouldn't do. And I was the same way. I was kind of like, well, it's kind of nice not working. I'm not gonna lie. But it was the little devil on one shoulder, the angel on the other, saying, stay, you've got it good. The angel saying, step it up, let's go, come on.
I feel like that one,
your God-given talent.
I feel like that voice talks to you a lot because you are so driven and you are so motivated. But there was a lot of fear still then in the
Oh
country.
yeah.
We've come so far, but there were so many unknowns. So were you worried about the things that you couldn't predict? Were you worried about the safety?
I mean, in the back of my mind, I figured that if I was going to New York City, I was going to get COVID. And if I was working in their ICUs, working in a hospital, I was going to end up with COVID. Now, whether or not I was going to die from COVID, I was kind of just, I did my cross and I said, if God is calling me to go there to do his work and to help people through me, if he's going to take me that way, then that's how it's going to go. But I mean, I don't know if I was necessarily scared. I mean, there's nerves, and I was anxious about it, but I wasn't afraid. I wasn't scared. If I was, I don't know, I don't want to make it sound like I'm some sort of crazy hero here, but I think it was calculated risks, right? And you can only be so afraid of what you don't know. I was nervous, but
I think it really speaks to who you are that you thought about it so calmly and logically and were still willing to say, yeah, you know what? I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm able-bodied. Let's go. Because we're not talking about Ohio, Carolina. The whole country was watching New York City then. And everything nationally was about what was going on there. And that's a whole other ball game.
Yeah. And it was, I looked at my fellow PA friends that are married with kids, and they're getting the same emails as me from New York saying, hey, we need help, and I thought, geez Louise, like, I don't have kids, I'm not married, I'm healthy, I'm totally capable to do this. And it kind of felt like it was my responsibility to do that, like yes, it was still my decision whether or not to go or to stay, but I did feel like this is what I am called to do, and like this is what I'm meant to do. So I felt very strongly about that, epicenter or not. I was going.
So your first contract that you picked up was for 4 weeks, right?
Yeah, it was 30 days straight.
30 days straight. What were your shifts like?
I didn't know what it was going to be until I got there, until I was assigned a specific hospital. But
which hospital?
North Central Bronx. So right in the middle of the Bronx. It was 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So a night shift.
Wow.
It was usually a little bit more than the 12 hours though. Yeah.
And then they set you up, right? Were you in a hotel or were you in a dorm room? I can't remember where you ended up staying.
Yeah, it was in a hotel. This organization had probably 5 or 6 hotels all in Manhattan, and everyone that stayed in the hotel, though, they were workers. So the entire Park Central Hotel was just PAs, NPs, doctors, nurse, medical workers, the entire hotel. I figured if someone had COVID, everyone's going to get COVID anyway. So
you were all in it together, really?
Yeah.
From what you're saying, you had that little team that you were just in there with.
Yep.
So I know for you, you are so kind and you are so humble. And a lot of times when you and I in the last year have talked about this, I can definitely sense that you don't feel like it's about you. The people that you were caring for, that was your objective. But I have to feel like that time that you spent working where you did took a toll on you.
Definitely. And yeah, it did. I mean, I had never worked in an ICU. I had never worked in a hospital before. And then to be just basically thrown in there, roll up your sleeves and seeing what we saw and not being able to really have a good grasp on how to treat it and how to help people and save people. It was a lot. I mean, and it was no rest for the weary, it was 2 months without break. And the second I was in the urgent cares during the day. So it was like urgent care during the day, ICU at night. And it was just, it got to be a lot.
And like you said, you didn't have a lot of answers. So when you were there for those shifts, were you just trying to get through? Were you trying to come up with new ways to deal with things?
Yes, we were trying to get almost all of our patients were on ventilators. So we were trying to figure out how to manage COVID the best way, how to treat it, and just get people out of the ICU was the biggest thing. We didn't know what worked for one person didn't work on the other person, and the amazing part was just that everyone, despite our backgrounds, we were all kind of in the same boat. Doctors, NPs, PAs. Nobody knew a whole lot about what we were doing. It was a lot of trial and error. And it sounds scary because like we're supposed to know these things. And as medical professionals, you want to be able to say, I know how to treat this. I know what steps are necessary to get you better. But we didn't know. Nobody knew. And so that was the scary part. That was the sad part, all kind of mixed in together. So what were we doing? We were trying to save lives by researching, bouncing ideas off of other doctors. I mean, it was an even playing field between the intensivist ICU doctor that's been practicing for 40 years and me, because I didn't know any less than he knew about COVID. And it was the teamwork to see people come together like that I'll never see anything like that again. I mean, it was incredible. And again, these are people from all over the US. It was just like picked out of a hat and thrown in. It was a war zone. It was total chaos. And yet we all got together and did the best we could. People died, but we did the best that we could.
And that's the harsh reality of what you're talking about, because you were dealing with the sickest of the sick in that area.
Yeah.
And these people too, they were isolated from their family, right? They couldn't, it's not like family could come in. And did that add an extra emotional toll for you when you were there with them?
Yes. In fact, I'd argue to say that was probably the hardest part, because these people were dying, they were suffering, and yet they couldn't talk to their family. They couldn't see their family members. The people that they're seeing are us that are in full PPE. We can't touch, you can't touch them. You're trying to stay away from them as best as you can. You're masked. There's so much about medicine that's very physical. You put your hands on a patient, to smile, all these things that these patients that are dying a terrible death without their family, without anybody, and just us. It's just the whole mental side of it must have been so traumatic. Talking to the family members over the phone to say, hey, look, your family member's not doing well. And the only way that they can communicate is by FaceTime. So watching somebody suffer over, you can't put that into words. That's so beyond what is human. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just, that was the worst part. Talking to family members that can't leave their house. They can't see them. They couldn't see them after they passed. That was the hardest part. Talking to family members was by far the hardest.
Yeah, it's hard, I think, for anybody that wasn't a part of what you were doing to imagine how heartbreaking that would be.
Yeah.
How did you cope internally with what you were doing for those people you cared for?
At first, it was really tough because I hadn't, even in my PA career, I hadn't been exposed to that much death. But as most medical professionals will probably tell you, it's not that you have to become insensitive, but you do have to develop a little bit of a tougher exterior. People are going to die. It's not our fault that they're dying, but you kind of have to get less affected by it. Doesn't mean that you're not affected by it. That's key. That still human, and there were still many times where doctors and nurses tried their hardest with the patient and the patient didn't make it. I think for me, I definitely turned to my faith. I was in the ICU for Pascha last year for Easter, for the resurrection, and it just, one of the most powerful moments for me, I remember it was midnight on Easter, and I had brought in the little icon of the resurrection with me in a little biohazard bag, and I had it next to my computer. And every time I would look up from my computer, one of my patients he had maybe 20 minutes to live, and he's just suffering and dying. And so there's, the resurrection and death, it doesn't get any more.
Wow.
If you're not spiritual and you go into that ICU, like, what's really the meat that's holding you together? And I lean on my faith a lot and God, and and knowing that, yeah, we're on earth and there is death, but there's something after death, and that is life. That was the biggest thing for me, and I felt closer to my faith than before, for sure. And I think if you talk to other people that have been through traumatic experiences, they would say a similar thing, that through tragedy and through difficult moments is actually where you find that your strength and your faith is strengthened through those difficult moments. But for me, for sure, it was faith, and God helped me get through, and family. I won't forget
Wow.
that either.
So you spent the first month in the hotel, and then your sister lives in New York City too. And at some point, was it during your first month or the second month that you went and started living with them?
It was, I had just signed my contract for a second time. So it was either right at the end of the first month or right at the beginning of the second month. I kind of can't remember. But yeah, I was able to stay with them. And that was huge. I mean, the family support and friends that had reached out via text and phone calls, and family members that I knew were praying for me, and all of that was very, very helpful, because it was socially isolating to be a health professional there in New York City as well. It was, I don't know, everybody was isolated, but even more so because everybody knew that we were exposed to COVID. Do you know what I'm saying? So that made things a little bit more ostracizing, I guess.
Which is a big part then of what pushed you to do what you did afterwards.
Yes, the mental toll that it took, and then just feeling like I needed to just clear my mind completely and be on my own schedule, and a kind of, it might sound really selfish, but to worry about me, just to not feel like I'm responsible for other people's lives. I know that sounds terrible.
No, it absolutely doesn't. You served so many people, and it's more than understandable that you would need to find a way to kind of mentally decompress and allow yourself to sort through everything you saw and everything you experienced. So you had finished your 2 months, you go back home. How long were you home, Theresa, before you're like, I'm gonna hit the road?
I mean, it was a couple days being home where I came up with an idea that I needed to do something. I needed to do something for me. I don't remember exactly how I thought. I think I just said I was going to ride my bike, and ride my bike was something that I knew I could do, and I knew I enjoyed, and I could just keep going. And it was probably a week after I was home that I bought the plane ticket, and then a day later I was gone. So
the one-way plane ticket
without a bike, and we'll figure it out when I get there.
I feel like a lot of people would hear that and think, wait a second, she just flew out there to do a big bike trip, no bike, nothing substantial planned out yet. Got to be honest, pretty typical, Theresa.
Yeah,
right? Pretty typical. I mean, I think you live life with your come with hammock, sleep wherever attitude. So Where was this trip starting?
It was starting in Portland, because that's where I had done a little bit of research, and I knew that my chances of getting a bike were a lot better in Portland. And because Rachel and my family members were living in Portland, I knew some people that might be able to help me out.
When did you actually get the bike? Kind of important for the bike trip.
I landed at 4 p.m. and I got the bike at 5 p.m. the same night. And I had messaged the one man that was selling a bike on Craigslist, and I looked at it and said, that's got to be the bike. It's in my size. And I said, I'll Venmo you money. Please don't sell it. And he said, why don't you come and ride it down the driveway before you ride it across the country? I said, fine. Okay, fine. So I had an idea of where I was going to get a bike from. Whether or not it was going to be the right bike, I didn't know. But
thankfully he had the caution in the sense like, listen, I'll keep the bike for you. Maybe test it out before you want to ride it, 3,500 miles across the country, but
pretty much. Yeah. So, but yeah, I got the bike that night. And the next day is when I started riding across. So
Did you sleep well that night? Were you excited? Were you nervous? Didn't matter. You were just going to go.
I was so excited. I thought this is just going to be the best adventure. And it didn't even matter how far I went that first day. I was just ready. I was ready to go, and I had this massive road wide open in front of me, and that was just so exciting. I didn't really have a plan, and that was so exciting.
See, this is another one of those genetic differences. The Mellas part of the family, the Georgiadis part of the family, like we don't even do a trip to Disney without a plan. So cross-country bike trip, I probably would have needed some more details if it were me, you know?
I mean, okay, I had a general idea. I said I knew that I wanted to go to Bend. I knew I wanted to go to Boise. I wanted to spend a couple of days in Jackson Hole and do some hiking. And then from there, I said, I got awesome family in Ohio that I clearly have to stop and stay with. And then from Ohio to New York. So I had a general idea, and then I just figured I'd connect the dots. So
how much did you pack with you? What were you carrying on your bike when you set off?
So that changed throughout the trip. I ended up stopping a few times and sending packages of things that I didn't need back home. So I'd say a couple times.
I didn't know that.
As I got further east, I was like, well, I don't need this long sleeve shirt. I don't need this pair of underwear, those things.
Underwear. Yeah.
All right.
It's fine.
But so I tweaked my gear list as I went. I had too much to begin with, which wasn't a lot. And then by the time I finished, I had it fine-tuned. Yeah.
So you just had those 2 saddlebags though, right? On the back.
Yeah, the 2 saddlebags. And I had one of those little camelback backpacks, the really small ones. I only put water in it because I knew that there would be some stretches on the road where I might not have water, and I wanted to make sure I had plenty of that. So I did have a little tiny camelback with one of those water bladders. Yeah. The 2 bags with a hammock, a tarp, like a lightweight tarp, a blanket, and then some clothes, and the Jetboil propane fuel thing.
I'm really excited about the Jetboil breakfast stories, but we'll wait until we get a little further on the road trip. The first day you left from Cannon Beach, right? Yep. You started at the ocean, touched the water.
In the ocean. Absolutely. Definitely.
How it was rain. Let's be honest, it was Portland, raining, right?
Pouring, windy and cold. I mean, I had a Gore-Tex coat on and my bike shorts, and I was cold. I feel like
I was going to say, I feel like for you to admit that you're cold, just another disclaimer for everyone that listens, that must mean that it was really, really cold. Must have been like really cold.
I mean, it was just wet and windy, and it was probably high 40s, low 50s. So it's not freezing, but it's just, you're wet. And I knew
miserable.
Oh yeah. I was like, and I'm going to be wet. It's not like I can escape this in any way. I'm going to get on a bicycle and now just keep riding my bike. So I better get used to it.
How far did you bike the first day?
The first day I rode about 45 miles. It was, I think I started at about 3 p.m. So I knew I wasn't going very far.
And where did you sleep the first night?
The first night I slept, I stayed the night in Tillamook, Oregon, and it's known for their cows and pastures and dairy farms, basically. And I slept behind a Baptist church in a cow pasture.
On the ground?
On the ground. Yeah, I did. I laid out my little bivy sack because it was raining. I laid out the waterproof bivy sack, and I just crawled in it. Yeah. It
was pretty early on in the trip, though, that you met some very nice people that offered for you. Was that still when you were in Oregon? that they said to you? I
Um,
remember you saying they offered for you to come sleep with them somewhere. And you were like, no, it's okay. I have my hammock. I have my sack.
yes, I had ran out of water that day. I was chasing a thunderstorm, and the nice older couple in this the only gas station in this town said, "Oh, you can stay in our little trailer in the back." And I thought, "Oh, that's so nice." But no, I'm fine. I have a hammock. It's waterproof. And the first lesson I learned on the trip was if someone offers you a place to stay, never turn it down. The second lesson was if nobody offers you a place to stay and you have to set up a camp, take the time to set up the appropriate sleeping situation, or else you'll get a terrible night's sleep.
Because you decided to just sleep at a playground. It poured.
Oh, yeah.
And you woke up in a puddle.
It was as if I was sleeping under a waterbed. Yeah.
Okay.
And you know what? Here's the funny thing is that I wasn't ever upset about it. I never remembered being like, oh, that was really bad. Now I'm miserable. And, I started the day off on a bad foot. It was just, wow, what great lessons I just learned. Like, this is amazing. I survived it, learned my lesson, and now I get to ride my bike all day. It was a different mindset, I guess, on this trip, I could be in a worse spot for sure.
Well, okay. So that's, I guess, a good point. I have to imagine, you were coming out of a pretty dark time. I feel like in a way you were kind of searching for the light.
Yeah, definitely.
So despite those great introductions to this trip, overall, how were you feeling those first few days that you were on your own, away from a lot of people?
I mean, cloud nine, really. Nothing was going to dampen my day. Not even the weather. Weather was nothing. It was insignificant. Yeah, I think knowing that I was where I was, that I had the freedom, that I was healthy, that you can't help but think of, as I'm riding my bike with 2 strong legs, 2 healthy lungs, you can't help but think of everyone that's not as fortunate, and I think that was probably the big driving force when it did get hard on the bike trip. And I'm like, hard? What? This isn't hard. There's nothing hard about this, I'm riding a bike under my own power, my own mental power, my own physical power, and things are so good. I mean, doesn't even matter if it's windy or raining. Like, this is so insignificant in the big picture. This isn't hard. What was hard was back in March. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that would get me through on the days where I'm like, do I feel like stopping today? Yeah, I don't. My butt hurts. Yeah, I want to stop. But
do you feel like you were doing a lot of reflecting early on in the trip and thinking about things, or did you kind of just shut your brain off a little bit and just let yourself ride?
I mean, it took a couple days to get into the routine and the swing of things, but I was thinking a lot at the beginning, and then I realized that I just need to not think and just ride. And then it kind of went back towards reminiscing the trip and thinking about how different situations have impacted me in different ways, and what is it that you see so much death, you see so much suffering, and you see a lot of people struggling with family members, and what is it in this life that is so worth living, and what's the secret to life and living, and not just happiness, because it's not always happiness, but life, I guess, in general. There's a lot of existential questions when you're by yourself for 37 days on a bicycle, and you talk to yourself and to your bike. No. And I did that every day.
Well, the bike's name was
Maelstrom. Mail for short.
A very apt name for its voyage christening. And
yes,
you're saying it was lots of existential. How can it not be? I can't imagine that you would be anything but thinking really deeply, because it's not like you're talking to anybody. You have to be comfortable with your own mind. And you know what else I really admire too is that is hard, Theresa, to let yourself be vulnerable in that way, and to let yourself kind of really dig deep and be honest about what you're carrying inside. And that's why I think the story of your journey across the country is so powerful, is because everybody carries hardships in very different ways and deals with challenges. And I think you being so open and honest about your journey and what you were feeling, it can help other people, because there's that emotional human connection that we can all relate to. And it just, the context of it looks different. So when you started, you were in it for a few days, going through Oregon, learned a couple of really great lessons early on. You started, though, having some really cool experiences with people. Do you remember one of the earliest encounters you had with someone that stuck with you?
Yeah. So I would say one of the most memorable, and there was a lot of memorable experiences, but I was in Gordon, Nebraska, a tiny town, hiccup of a town, and I'd set up my my hammock in the park, and I was going to charge my phone in like an outdoor little outlet that I found, and this little old lady walks down the street with this tiny little dog, and she sees me with my little camp set up, and she waves, and we get to talking. Oh, we need to stay. I hear we need to stay the 6 feet apart. I've heard. Have you heard of this Corona thing? Have you heard of the COVID? I've heard of this COVID thing. And so we get to talking, and she was the sweetest little lady. And then the next thing she says, well, why don't you come on over and I'll make you some strawberry shortcake. And she says, well, how about I bring it to the park so that you don't have to leave all your gear. And so here she comes with the little dog 15 minutes later with the little wicker basket full of strawberry shortcake, and I'm in the park enjoying a really nice conversation with this little lady. And it was right before the 4th of July, so we were watching fireworks and hearing her story. And I travel a lot. This little lady went to Alaska by herself at age 75 and went whitewater rafting. She was the coolest person ever.
Oh my gosh. It was meant to be.
It was
totally meant to be.
Totally. And she invited me the next morning and said, well, before you go tomorrow, I'll have coffee and I'll have breakfast for you. My house is just down the road, and stop by. And I actually still write, she still sends me little letters and postcards. And so it's the cutest thing. She was so memorable. And I think that was really after the meeting with her, you're on your bike forever and you start thinking about things. And that's kind of where I started getting this idea of asking people that I meet, this existential question about what they think the meaning and the purpose of life is, and what their secret is to living, not just happy, but a fulfilled life, and what that means to them, because I was just curious. And
and it's funny too, because you felt so isolated when you were working and it was so difficult. And then you wanted to take this time, you needed to do something for you, but you end up, don't you feel like you ended up feeling so connected to others?
That was it. And not just to others, but it was reestablishing a connection with the world around me. I was biking through just some incredible places, but it was just breathtaking. So connection with the world around me, connection to myself. I've never talked to myself so much or learned so much about myself. Connection to others. People were so starved to have social interaction at that point in June, July. They were just people. Despite how negative everything was with all the social issues going on, people were so good and so kind and loving and open. So it was, reestablishing connection with others. And then, for me, again, the spiritual aspect of this was pretty impactful. So I would say the connection again with God was big. So I definitely, connection, I think I learned how completely vital it is. And it's ironic because COVID, you're so disconnected. I mean, sure, we have Zoom, we have FaceTime, we have all these things that promise connection, but it's not connection. That's not connection. Utilizing those things tends to make me feel more disconnected than connected.
Absolutely. I think it does for everybody.
Right.
And that's too, and you even touched on it. Things were dark for a lot of different reasons in the country. You left in June and July, and it wasn't just COVID at that point. It was a lot of social unrest. It was a lot of political division. Things were
a
dark.
Mess. It was
a mess.
It was a mess.
Because you spent a large portion of this trip in the middle of nowhere, right? Yeah. Like you spent a lot of this time really on your own, but still to hear from you those little moments that you were having with people is just so incredible. And I love to, there was so much generosity that you experienced from town to town that you stopped in. The woman that you just talked about being one of them. I mean, didn't you have people that like let you in their house and then were like, bye, we have, we got to go. Just lock the door for us on your way out.
Yep.
If you could just lock the door, that'd be great.
Here's a towel, have a shower, help yourself to the fridge. Keys are there. Just lock it on your way out. That was a family in Wyoming that just let me crash with them. We shared a beer on their back porch. And
How did you meet that family?
I arrived, or I had ridden like 130 miles that day, and I ended up in Cody, Wyoming, Casper, Wyoming, and I was sitting on the sidewalk in front of this little brewery, and I had gotten some food and was just enjoying the sunshine and being off of my bike. And it was a really lovely couple next to me that saw my bike and asked questions, and we got to talking. And I think I'd asked her, I said, where is a good spot to put up a hammock that might be safe and away from people? And she said, my backyard. Okay. Well, how about you just sleep somewhere where I'm not going to worry about you tonight? So she gave me her address and said, I'm picking up her kid. She's picking up her kids, and that we'd all meet up in their backyard for some, drinks and snacks. And they were so sweet. Their kids were adorable.
So incredible. Because more often than not, well, not more often than not, all the time, you were sleeping outside in the hammock. You have one of those hammocks that you set up between two trees. So a lot of times you were like looking for what? Park?
Yep. And mostly it was a park, because park somewhere away from, homes. And I didn't want people to get too suspicious of me, or I didn't want to cause issues,
or call the police on you, or
call the police on me. So yeah, most of the time it was town parks that I would spend the night in. I did knock on a couple people's doors to see if I could sleep next to their cornfield. Or
wasn't there one woman that was like started off a little, because one time I think you said it was late, and you finally found a couple trees you thought you could hang out in, but it was like on someone's big farm property, right? You're in Farmville, United States. What did I feel like, didn't she say something like, I feel like she said something funny.
She was, I think if I'm thinking of the story that you're thinking of, it was, I knocked on their door. I had like my helmet on and everything. And it was a giant farm, beautiful farm in, eastern Nebraska. And she looked at me, and clearly I'm not really that much of a threat. I look like a 17-year-old on a homeless kid. And he had said, she looked at me and she said, yeah, you can stay here. And she's like, kind of looked me up and down. She's like, I'm pretty sure I could take you. Like if I tried to do anything, which she probably knew that I wasn't. I mean, I'm dirty and stinky, and I'm 5 foot nothing. A really tall farmer that was just tough and gritty and built. Pretty sure I could take you.
Oh my gosh, that was a good one.
They were so nice. They gave me a hot dinner, and just the nicest people. I'm still in contact with them now. So
a lot of people, it sounds like, that you had met, and you still
and it seemed like everyone that I met said, please keep me posted. Here's my number. Text me. I mean, I want to hear about your journey, and influenced also by your family that encouraged me to make my Instagram public. People want to hear about this, and we want to know. People want to be updated. And so I was updating all these people as I went along, in addition to family members. And it was kind of fun to feel like people were joining me. on it,
Yes. It was incredibly exciting to see what you were doing. And again, at that time, we were really pretty much at home. So every morning, that was like the exciting thing for us to see, oh, where's Theresa at today? How far did she go? And so I think it's really wonderful that as you started making more connections and meeting more people, that you felt more encouraged to share, because it was just so it was such a beautiful journey that you were on. And for everybody else to watch it and kind of feel a part of it, just another way that we were together, right? Even though we weren't really together.
Yeah. And and I've told people this before, but I discovered the meaning of the trip as I continued on the trip. And when I first left, nobody knew I was gone. I mean, my immediate family knew. You guys knew because I asked if I could, meet up with you at some point. But my friends didn't know. A lot of closer family, cousins and stuff, had no idea where I was. They thought I was probably still in New York. And then as I, going along, making my way across, I did realize that, wow, I'm realizing that people are finding a lot of joy in my sharing of what I'm doing and what I'm seeing and the people I'm meeting and experiencing. And yeah, that was powerful to me, that people were and that encouraging and that interested and finding that much joy in what I was doing.
You just really served as this bright light then during that time. Sharing this story, it really, I think we've talked about it a lot, but it's, for lack of a better word, it just truly is inspiring, because you were such a great reminder, I feel like, of how much good there is. And that was something that we had talked about when you did make your way to Ohio, is that you just felt, I feel like at the time you were just so overwhelmed with how much kindness you were experiencing and how much joy you were experiencing with other people. I mean, don't you just feel like at that time it was such a great reminder that there are good people out there, and there are people who care about being kind to one another.
Yes, overwhelmingly so. I mean, and especially like you had mentioned before, things were so negative then. I mean, everything was so negative, or it seemed so negative, dark, grim, negative. But it's really the complete opposite. And I know I've said this before, that when you go looking for things that are negative, you'll find it 100%. You'll find it, but if you've got such a different outlook and a different, what you're looking for is good and honest, that's the only thing you'll actually see. And it's crazy, a mind shift can do a lot. But yeah, the goodness of people was unreal. Not doubted it, but it was just overwhelming.
So how many, you said one day you did like 130 miles. That was average high, right? Like how many miles a day were you doing?
I think the average ended up being the average per day, it ended up being somewhere in the 112 to 120, maybe like 125 a day, I think it ended up coming to.
You said earlier on that in your pack, you had one of those, what's the thing I always ask you about that I think is so fascinating? The jet. The jet
boil.
Yeah. Because people like me that don't do as many of these big adventures, I have no concept of the materials, the tools that are involved with getting yourself from point A to point B on your own.
Yeah, I had the jet boil with me, so I was able to have a hot breakfast and coffee if I wanted coffee. And I typically it was so hobo. I had like this little paper bag on the back of my bike that I put some groceries in, some granola bars and apples and cheese and stuff like that. But it was kind of hobo looking.
Were you tracking how much you ate calorie wise, or trying to make sure like, oh, I need to stop, I need to eat, I need to drink?
I made it a point, and this took me a couple of days to find the rhythm here and find what worked best so I didn't feel fatigued. But I made it a point every 2 hours, I would get off the bike, stop, get off the bike, even if it was for 15 minutes, and I would eat something. And typically it was like a power bar or an apple and some cheese and meat. Sometimes it's just like a chunk of bread. So every 2 hours I was making sure I drank all my water that I had and getting off my bike.
Because all in all, this trip took you, was it 31? How many days did this trip take you?
The total trip was 37 days, and that was including 32 days of riding my bike. So 5 down days where I didn't ride at all. And those were days when I was visiting with a friend and then hiking in Jackson in the Tetons.
So the biking also included hiking, adventure. We'll just tack that in there.
Yeah. Why not? Yeah. Just hiking.
You made it to Ohio, which is where we are. That you were about at the 3/4 way mark.
Jeez.
Or a little past that, maybe.
I remember your mom made the sign saying I only had 500 miles to go.
Right. So I guess that was a little, you were past the 3/4.
Yeah, I was getting past really close. Yeah.
And I think it was at that point that, like I said, well, like you had said, it took you a while to really sink into what the purpose of the trip was. And I feel like you were really connected with it at that point.
Visiting with you guys was a really big turning point for me, actually. And it was because, like you said, you guys were at the point where you needed that just as much as I did. And I don't think I actually realized it until after, though. How much it was impacting, and I needed it. I needed that just as much as everyone else. I think it was after that I thought to myself, like, this is more meaningful than I had even thought up to this point. And the people that I can help and the people that I can reach with this journey and this experience goes much beyond what I had thought.
You had been asking people for a while, though. As you started to meet more people, you started to ask them, and you were recording your question. Yeah. What is the meaning of life?
Yeah.
What is the purpose of life?
What is their secret to life? That was my question that I'd ask.
What were some of the answers you got? Was there anything that really stuck with you, or anything that you've kind of carried with you still? Because that's like a no pressure question, right? That's like a no pressure question. And
yeah, don't think too hard on that one. Right. No, you know what? I internalized all of them, and I thought how each of those each of their answers really related and spoke to me. And a lot of them were God, a lot of them was, family. And from their answers is when I came up with my own answer. And I can't give myself the credit, because I give it all the credit to everyone that I had asked and helped me formulate my answer based on their answers. So, and I just really connection. I think it all comes down to that, what we talked about before. It's an intense connection, whether it's connection, as people would say, with family. What's the secret to life? I need family in my life. God, having faith, being outside, all of these things that seemed to me, as I sat on my bike and pedaled 3,500 miles, that it came down to having a connection. But yeah, wow. It wasn't my idea. It was everyone else's idea that helped influence mine.
I think it takes a special person to pull that out of people. So I think you should give yourself a little bit more credit in that respect. But I think too, I feel like hopefully at least that was a lesson we all learned this last year, when we weren't able to do the things that we normally did, when we were thrown out of our routine. I think it was a reminder for lots of us that those moments are really precious. And at the end of the day, so many of those moments are really what matter most. The times that we're able to spend with the people that we love, because we didn't know before what it would be like without them. And now that we've all had a little taste of that, I think there's been a big perception shift in how we kind of value and prioritize those things. I feel like I've had it. I feel like other people in my life have had it. And I feel like what you did is just such a great example of that.
Yeah. You nailed it. Yes, I agree.
And like I said, it was just so exciting to hear about the people you met that wanted to give you shortbread, and so much positivity and so much hope. It's just so much joy. Like, actually, not less on the existential path here, but one of my favorite stories was the night that you were booted from your very public sleeping place. What happened? I don't remember what state you were in when you were told, "Hey lady, you can't sleep here." Where were you?
I was Illinois. So I was just outside of Joliet, Illinois. So just before
Okay.
Chicago. And I had found a little park. It was late. I was tired. It was another, 130-mile day. And I was under an awning in this little park. And I don't remember seeing a sign that said no camping or no overnight. There probably was. I just wasn't paying attention. And I figured, no one's going to see me here. I was off the street. I was off the main road, and I was asleep in my hammock when a light was shined on me, and, "Hey, what are you doing? What are you doing?" And I remember my answer was, "I'm sleeping." "I'm sleeping. What does that look like I'm doing?" And yes, the officer said, "Well, this is, you're trespassing." And he took my ID actually and went back to
Oh
his
boy.
police car. And I was like, "Is he gonna give me a ticket?" What? But he told me nicely that I needed to find somewhere else to spend the night. And it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm groggily trying to pack everything up and get back on my bicycle to I don't even know where. But yeah, that was a fun wake up. That only happened once. I only got kicked out of a spot one time, so it's not that bad. I think the percentage.
One time,
One
booted
time.
from a sleeping spot one time with your
Booted.
hammock.
That I ended up sleeping down by the river. He's like, "Oh yeah, there should be a park down by the river." I'm like, "Oh geez, that sounds sketchy."
A little bit. Did you ever feel, because as you came further east, you definitely started hitting some bigger or more populated cities. So did you ever feel nervous? Like, this isn't where I want to sleep tonight, or I should probably keep moving, or
No, and I didn't keep moving because I felt nervous about where I was
mm-hmm.
sleeping, mostly just because the spot wasn't to my liking. But no, I don't remember feeling very nervous the further east I went. I mean, definitely
Yeah.
more people, and I missed the West. I missed being, rural and remote and not seeing other people. I did miss
Mm-hmm.
that aspect of it at times. But there was also a lot more people to talk to at that
Mm-hmm.
point too, towards the end of the trip. But no, I don't. I was still able to sleep in parks, and really that eastern part of the trip seemed to go by really fast at that point. And I knew once I left Ohio, it was kind of, or I should say Pennsylvania, because I stayed with another family member in Pennsylvania. But
Mm-hmm.
from there on out, it was like a few days, and it was my last night. Whoa.
That's funny, because when I would talk about you to other people, that was probably the question I was asked the most, is that people they were wrapping their heads around the fact that you were just biking and then sleeping outside. That was probably the one thing that they just could not wrap their heads around. And I tried to explain to them that the hammock sleeping situation, very typical. Don't worry about
Right.
it. She does it all the time. It's okay. But I just got so many faces like that. Yes. Cause they were like, "Well, is she by herself?" So explaining to people the reasons behind why you were doing what you were doing, I think that added some more context to your story.
It's not that I would open up with that, at any means. If I
Mm-hmm.
ran into somebody and if they asked me, "Why are you doing this trip?" That's when I would say, "Well, I needed to decompress from what I did."
Not to go back to that too much, but it's got to be a little hard to talk about sometimes too.
Yeah, I mean, hard to talk about, and I don't know if I'd say hard to talk about.
Difficult maybe to explain, to
To
articulate to
explain.
others. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard to. That's it, because I don't want to say that people have a hard time relating, because people are very sympathetic, and everyone was going through their own form of traumatic experience during COVID pandemic in March, April, May. So I don't put it by people that they can't sympathize with it. But at the same time, I think there was a lot that people can't relate to as well. You don't know whether or not you should go there when you talk to people about it. Like, do you go to that? Do you go into that realm of what you really experienced and what you really felt? And sometimes it depends on the person you're talking to, whether or not you can get that far involved. But for the most part, people want to hear, but they also probably are more sensitive to that kind of information that you don't want to just them.
Well, I think that's true of so many things, that it's hard if you didn't experience it to really be able to understand all the aspects of it and the challenges that were involved. But I think that's what's so amazing about what you did last year, is that I think it gives everyone a perspective that would be hard to gain.
Definitely.
And it can be very healing to hear about somebody else's journey and how they dealt with it. So I think it's really wonderful for you to be able to share this with others, because, well, I'll ask you what you're planning on doing next in a few minutes, but you left Ohio. You only had about 500 miles left in your 3,500 mile trip. What was that last day like when you knew that you were getting close to the end? Yeah.
Man. It was, I remember that morning as I'm packing things up, and I in my mind, I was so excited. I was so excited to see my family that I knew was going to be, waiting in Central Park, and that some of them would be doing the last tail end of the trip with me, the last couple miles. So I was so excited to see them. And as I sat there in my hammock that morning, I just thought, like, wow, I don't want to be done with this. I don't want this to be over yet. I love riding my bike.
Who says that? You talked about sleeping in the farms and not having food, and like, but I don't want it to end.
But it's so good. It was so fun. There was a lot of excitement, though. There was excitement for knowing that, I was going to be reconnected with family, and I was so excited to share this trip with them, and the joy of being able to finish this trip, and the reaching this goal was just so incredible. And to do it right in the same spot that I spent so much, of those 2 months in the ICU, was like, that was really powerful. I didn't think of it in that way initially when I said, I'll just end up back in New York City and biking down the same route that I would take home from the hospital. And it was pretty powerful as I was riding that bike. And I'm like, man, this is a big deal.
Huge.
It's a huge deal. And so there was a lot of emotion in that last day, for sure.
Wow. I never even thought about that you were going to be ending and biking down the same road a month later. You're right. That is incredibly powerful to have had that kind of full circle moment and to be able to share it with your family.
That was cool. That was just really cool. They were there at the beach in Staten Island with a little sign and with their bells, and my nieces and nephews had colored in a sign that said "From Coast to Coast," and we strapped it on the back of my bike. So I was riding through Central Park with that, and then on the Staten Island ferry, and it definitely turned a lot of heads, and that was cool too, because I'm like, I just rode my bike across the US. What? No biggie.
No big deal. No. And I can't get over that you just did it. It's so easy, especially for somebody that's a overthinker, to put it nicely, like me. I let the logistics of things get in the way, and you just did it. Really incredible.
I tend to fly by the seat of my pants a bit, though.
Well, a little bit, but it's okay. I think in this instance, that was part of what made it special. I think in this instance, it was part of the experience.
It was I was really at that tipping point where, yes, that's how I am. That's how I know that I function is kind of spontaneous, but it was even much more of a spontaneous move, even for me.
You then, after this experience, the next plan for you is to...
I'm hoping I can write a book about this. It's more intimidating to write this all down and to share it in words.
Mm-hmm.
than it was to ride my bicycle across the US. It's a continuation of that journey is how I'm looking
Mm-hmm.
at it. But it's a much more daunting journey right now. I'm discovering.
Well, and it makes you get deeper, I think, probably in a whole different way to write it
Definitely.
down. And
Yeah. I know, and from what we've chatted about it is the vulnerability of it, and it's one thing to talk to a family member that can sympathize and can understand, but when you're writing it down, writing your thoughts, writing your feelings down on paper,
mm-hmm.
it's a whole nother ball game. It's a whole nother level of opening up and being vulnerable and really paying attention to what it is that you want to convey to the person that's reading it.
It can be intimidating to be that open, but I think that's where all the power really is in the ability to do that, which is why yours is a story that I'll say over and over again is absolutely worth sharing. And I am so thankful today that I got to talk to you and I got to pick your brain about your experience. And again, I hope that your story is one that keeps getting told, because I think yours has so much to offer. So thank you so much for wanting to do this.
This was so nice to be able to chat with you about it, and I've gotten to appreciate being able to share it more too, because as you said, it does reach people differently. And thank you for thinking of me for it. And I'm so I feel so blessed that you thought of me.
How could I not? How could I not? You're so special. So I love you. Thank you. Thank you. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks again for listening to this episode of In the Game with Elliot. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Also, check out In the Game with Elliot on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or watch full episodes on the YouTube channel.